And next, there will be a man from Bielefeld, our colleague from Bielefeld University Library, Jochen Schirfwagen. Jochen is working as a project coordinator at Bielefeld University Library. And you have been involved very, very long, because I remember Sami saying that 2012 was where you go, and you say that since 2008 you have been involved in open access infrastructure projects funded by both German Research Foundation and European Commission. You support the Bielefeld team in OpenAIRE in areas of content provider interoperability guidelines, metadata aggregation, and the OpenAIRE usage statistic service. And it's very nice to have you here, Jochen. Please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, hello, and thank you, Pauli and Kimmo, for your kind invitation. So my talk today is about aligning European repositories to the OpenAIRE guidelines. I wonder if here are any repository managers, either institutional, thematic, or data repositories. Okay, so we are not alone. Why about repositories? Here's a statement from a working group in CORE, Next Generation Repositories, saying that repositories are the foundation for distributed, globally networked infrastructure, and most importantly, they need to be collectively managed by the scholarly community, so following the principles of open science. I outlined my presentation that I give a brief introduction to OpenAIRE, then coming to the OpenAIRE interoperability guidelines, and last but not least, I will talk about the OpenAIRE services and the benefits they should provide to repositories, for instance. OpenAIRE wouldn't be possible without the open access, open science policies and mandates of the European Commission. So the different phases of OpenAIRE, which started in 2009, are strongly related to measurements of the European Commission, starting with the open access pilot for publications in Framework Program 7. And this was the moment when also the OpenAIRE project started with the mission to collect publications with an acknowledgement statement saying this is funded in FP7 and report this to the European Commission. And you can also see that the different stages always started with a pilot, and then it was made mandatory for all publications, the same for research data starting in Horizon 2020 is now a default to make research data available of funded H2020 projects. And also the launch of the European Open Science Cloud is a clear consequence of these measurements of the European Commission. And we will, despite all of the challenges, see quite optimistic in the future with the next research program, Horizon Europe, when open science is declared as a modus operandi. So what is OpenAIRE? It's a quite large project with about 50 partners across Europe. And we are focused on mainly three aspects which are connected, which are where one area guides and drives the other. So it's the technical infrastructure, where we have an aggregation service where we collect different kinds of research output, not only from repositories, but mainly. Then we make it visible via the portal We provide dashboards for different stakeholders, like for funders, for institutions, but also for content providers. And we are offering a machine interface so that third-party services or innovators can build on the content that OpenAIRE provides. Of course, and it was also mentioned by the first speaker today, that the policy landscape in Europe with regard to open access, open science is quite complex and challenging. And one of the aims of OpenAIRE was and is to contribute to the alignment of those policies, but also to work in the area of studies, to provide recommendations about legal issues, to overcome legal issues and intellectual property rights, for instance, especially with regard to research data. But also in relation to our aggregation service, we need some kind of agreement with content providers how they should provide their metadata to OpenAIRE. Therefore, we issued guidelines. And most importantly is the strong human network in OpenAIRE, which consists of the 34 national open access desks, among them the Nords from Finland. And they are working on a national level with fostering open science in their communities, and also providing support and training measurements like by workshops or webinars, and publishing fact sheets and guides on different aspects of open science. So in the past there were sometimes questions who is using OpenAIRE services, so what are our stakeholders, and here are identified 4 groups. So we have the funders and institutions which are interested in monitoring their research output. We have the content providers and research infrastructures where we want to collect their content and make them visible, but we also want to provide services, value-added services for these type of stakeholders. We have innovators that can access the scholarly information graph from OpenAIRE to build more sophisticated services. And of course, we have the very important group of researchers and research communities where we offer our discovery services. On the right side, I've chosen just 2 collaboration projects and initiatives. Of course, OpenAIRE is connected to much more projects and much more initiatives, but I think these 2 are also related to repositories, because with a collaboration with EOSC Hub, which addresses 3 pillars like service integration to make to provide a seamless information flow of research results among services between OpenAIRE and the federated infrastructures of EOSC Hub, but also to work together towards communication activities and producing training materials together, and of course also to align the different strategies of these projects. And I think this is an opportunity where all the content which we have in European repositories, to make them an entry point to the EOSC portal. But also OpenAIRE collaborates with the Confederation of Open Access Repositories, which is a global lobbying initiative for open access repositories. And here it is important to overcome the issues of data silos, to see repositories as data silos, it's important to make the content of repositories visible globally and connected with other scholarly output. And this is also an activity within CORE in the Next Generation Repositories Working Group, which analyzed several user behaviors and provide or promotes some technical solutions to upgrade the technology of repositories to a more web-compliant standard. OpenAIRE numbers, just a few. In our production environment, you can discover 25 million publications, where the majority is open access. We have collected and indexed 1 million of research data sets. We collect this information from around, or no, in other words, this content is available in about 14,000 content providers. We work together with 18 funders in Europe and worldwide in order to identify the research output from the projects funded by these funders. And so we identified at the moment 20.7 million grants. This is a view on the quite complex infrastructure of OpenAIRE. So we collect all our information from authoritative databases or registries like funder databases. We make use of directories for open access journals or directories of open access repositories or RIS3 data for data repositories to identify the relevant data sources. We gather content in form of metadata, if possible also the full text files, and also we would like to track usage data or usage events from these sources. The content is then going through a pipeline of different services to normalize the content, which is then stored in the information database of OpenAIRE by generating an information graph of different entities, which provides main features like enriching the aggregated content, make them discoverable, but also offering a feedback chain to the users. The content is available for monitoring, for instance, that the funders can see the research outputs of their projects, but also for project beneficiaries to report their publications to their funders. The APIs are available for developers, and a couple of text and data mining services provide more sophisticated services that allow to assess evaluations or impacts or research trends. There are a few recent services released, like the Open Access Broker service, which I present at the end of my presentation, and the Scholarly Explorer, which allows exploring links between publications and data sets, which is actually also an outcome of an RDA working group. So I've shown you that we collect content from various types of data sources. And this has challenges, of course, with regard to interoperability. We collect different groups of research results, which are publications, data sets, software, and so-called other research products. And we identified that all these groups of research results can exist at the same time in each of these kinds of data sources like institutional repositories, journals, data repositories, software repositories, and so on. So we need some kind of agreement, and so we started with issuing guidelines. The first were about the or addressing the textual publications and institutional thematic repositories, extended then by guidelines for data archives, for software repositories and other research products, and most recently we also updated guidelines for CRIS platforms, which now also allows that we can aggregate content from current research information systems. So we can deal with rich research information in OpenAIRE. A complement to these guidelines is the OpenAIRE content acquisition policy, and this is needed for different reasons. One reason is that we extended our scope not only to collect open access publications or publications linked to projects, but to collect all kinds of research output regardless of their access status. And the content acquisition policy addresses different aspects. The one is that we need an agreement with content providers that OpenAIRE allows to reuse metadata and other files, for instance for text and data mining, but also to agree on a certain level of content quality, which is then more refined in the OpenAIRE guidelines. We also want to serve different research communities so that we can link the content in OpenAIRE with domain-specific research results. We also want to enable reproducibility, and for this aim it is important that we can link publications with other research output, and we want to provide a monitoring, for instance, for funders. In December last year, we issued the most recent version of these guidelines for literature repository managers. It's still based on formats that are aimed for descriptive metadata, like Dublin Core and DataSite metadata schema. We consider here that in many repositories we find both kinds of output, textual and data publications. So we need one format which we can use to describe different kinds of outputs. We make use of controlled vocabularies, which are also aligned with other OpenAIRE guidelines. The goals of these metadata guidelines are that we want to be able to discover and make the content citable. We want that the content is accessible and able for reuse. We want to contextualize the research output with other projects or with the related projects and other research artifacts, for instance, data sets. We want to support interoperability, which requires stable, persistent identifiers for the entities and the use of controlled vocabularies. We want to allow reporting, which requires references to funding information in the metadata. And we want to support text and data mining, which requires certain license conditions and also the provision where such files, for instance, the full text, is located. I don't want to talk much about the guidelines for CRIS managers because we will have another talk in the afternoon about this topic and some early results. But I want to mention that from the OpenAIRE perspective, we see that the CRIS can be used for different cases. as an institutional CRIS, which, like a repository, exposes the research output, but also the funder CRIS, which OpenAIRE could use as an authoritative database about the funding programs and projects, and the national CRIS, which acts as a national aggregator of research information. In this slide, I show the current compatibility of the data sources in OpenAIRE. On the right side, it's a compatibility level for repository data sources, which in some are about 980. And on the right side, the compatibility level for journal data sources. What we can see here is that the majority of data sources still comply on a very basic level, so expose descriptive metadata, where we often miss some more information like links to other research output, or are missing links to funding information. Here's a list of a few challenges we are faced in our daily work when we aggregate content from repositories. The problem of missing values, the problem that we are missing links and identifiers. Still quite often controlled vocabularies are not used or not in the agreement we offer them in the OpenAIRE guidelines. Or the metadata descriptions are not comprehensive enough, so they provide just the mandatory values, which limitates the abilities of discovery and reuse. So what are OpenAIRE services which repositories could benefit from? So I present here a few of OpenAIRE services, but want to limit on the last three ones, which is the registration and validation service, the open access broker service for content enrichment, and the usage statistics service. You can also find all these services in the EOSC service catalog, which is, so it is already integrated there. For repository managers, OpenAIRE offers a Contentprovider dashboard where a repository manager can register with an account and register and validate its data source. It can subscribe to the open access broker service to receive notifications on specific metadata records, or it can also join the usage statistics service. The registration is quite straightforward to choose the type of data source and then go to a few steps to register the interface of the repository. We try always to reuse information from existing directories like OpenDoor or Re3Data. Features for repository managers are that they can view the validation history. It's also in preparation to provide continuous validation, so not only at the time of registration of the data source, but also each time the repository is harvested or aggregated, which can then be seen in the collection monitor. The broker service is an opportunity to complete or provide additional information about open access, about the metadata records in a repository. And this addresses different aspects like completing information about persistent identifiers. Then the problem, for instance, that a publication in a repository is not available as open access, but in another repository or journal, the open access version might be available, so this information can then be enriched. Enrichment of project information, of classification of subjects, or abstract information. The usage statistics service is an opportunity to where OpenAIRE tracks usage events from the repositories about the views and downloads, and then calculates counter-compliant usage statistics. The advantage in OpenAIRE here is that we can, thanks to our data application service, accumulate the usage of a publication which is stored in different sources, and in this way to provide a more comprehensive view of the usage of a publication, for instance. And this is how it looks like in the dashboard and in the portal, so we can provide statistics on the level of the whole repository, or as a view of a specific item of a specific publication, for instance. And that's it.
Thank you, Johan. Questions to Johan? It's the one you skipped, the CRIS, it was a jungle. But as you said, we come back to that later in the afternoon. Okay, I ask one question from what kind of network of repository managers exists in Europe? Because I think all this needs a good cooperation between repository managers.
Well, I think there's still a lot to do to improve this coordination among repository managers, and the situation in the countries is very different. I can only say something about, for instance, for Portugal or for Germany, where I know that we have a national network. Even Portugal has a national repository aggregator, and is strongly connected to the institutions, to the universities. While in Germany we have a group from different institutions which, quite similar to the OpenAIRE guidelines, issued a certificate to repositories when they comply to certain metadata requirements. And then we, as I also mentioned, we have CORE as a confederation of open access repositories where repository managers can engage regarding different topics like next generation repositories, user statistics, controlled vocabularies, research data, linked data, and so on.
And you also mentioned the cooperation with RDA. So are there coming more guidelines from RDA to be implemented in OpenAIRE context?
I don't know if it's specifically from RDA, but what I think will be more relevant in the near future is the metadata guidelines from EOSC Pilot, EDMI, as a minimal metadata exchange format, especially for research data across the different research infrastructures.
So, as you have presented, we need all the technical network, but also the human network. And for the new human network, I ask all these speakers from this morning, come here, because we want to give you a little piece of wood. This is technological wood. So, thank you. Thank you, Heidi. And thank you, Sami. And last but not least, thank you, Johan. And thank you for audience. And we have now lunch. We can give one more big hand to our speakers. So We come back after lunch, 15 or something like 10 to 1. And I ask also those who are online, come at that time, because Ville will tell about workshop, and also the online participants can also participate in the workshop. So I hope you have good lunch and bon appetit. Let's see after 45 minutes.